Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to review the build that I did previously with the SGPC K88. The topics I will cover will be shown on the screen right now. But first, let's see the unboxing. Now, something a bit weird is that my unit actually comes with an acrylic panel instead of tempered glass. Now for me, acrylic panel, especially when there's no ventilation hole, is a bit pointless. You might as well go for the tempered glass, because that's the only benefit of acrylic as opposed to tempered glass, because there should be ventilation holes. Acrylic, as you know, scratches easily, so I don't really like it as a material. Now on further removing the aluminium panel, we can see that the accessory box, we will see the contents of it later, but first let's take a look at the inside of the case. As you can see, clearly it can fit a full ATX power supply along with an M80X motherboard. There should be no problem. You can see the 4 PCI slot at the back. In terms of cabling, it is also actually quite sparse, having only the USB port, USB 3.0 cable, power cable, and also the on-off switch to connect to the motherboard. The panel is also, although made of aluminium, but it doesn't feel very thick. I think it's around 1mm thickness. I mean, it's not like Fantex like 3mm aluminium panel, thick and sturdy like that. I won't say it's flimsy, but I won't say it's the most sturdiest case around. But the pros of it is that because it's made of aluminium and the panel are very thin, it's actually very lightweight, weighing around I think 2 kilos only. The feet of the case is also quite tall, so it should allow for adequate ventilation for intake from the bottom side of the case. Now, looking at the included accessories for the case, it comes with two 92mm fans, but the disappointing thing about this fan is actually there's two things. Number one, the fan is not slim. So for me, I always go with slim 15mm thickness fans for any small form factor build. And the other thing is that this fan cannot be controlled via PWM. It's only 3-pin, not 4-pin, so I would discard this fan immediately, which is a bit disappointing because they already included a fan which could have been very useful. Instead, for me, I won't be using this fan for any build. Now, another thing that is included is this leather strap. This is actually for you to mount this strap at the back of the case, so you can carry the case from back instead from the top. So it looks quite sturdy, but I'm not sure if it can hold all the weight of the case. So another thing included is the screws for the acrylic side panel, or if you're planning to use a tempered glass. There's no rubber protection on the screw, so frequently removing and closing the screw might cause scratches. Now, another thing that is included that we will definitely be using is the top handle. I really like this top handle because it feels like very sturdy plastic. Also, I also like the color. The orange actually makes it quite contrasty compared to the bland silver color of the case. Now, as far as cable management, as you know, in a small form factor case, it's never as easy as a full ATX, and there are a few pointers that you need to do. Number one, as you can see, it's better to route all the fan cables behind the motherboard tray. So before installing the cable, make sure you do this first, because there's around, like for me, there's around 5 fan cables, so you need to route it. Also, make sure you zip tie any additional cable, any excess cable, especially the fan cable. You can using zip tie, like for me at the top. Also, zip tie any excess cable. Now, this is a con of using a non-modular power supply. However, the excess cable is not too much. There's only very little. The SATA and the MOLEX cable, you just need to bundle them up and tie it with zip ties. Now, another thing that I need to point out is make sure you have some gaps between the fans for you to screw the nuts for the top handle. I mean, this is especially relevant if you're planning to use the handle. If you're not, then you're free to use even up to 120mm at the top. But if you're using the handle, I think you're limited to only either 192mm, 292mm or 192mm and 120mm fans. Now, another thing that kind of sucks is the PSU cable is actually quite short, so there's no way for you to route the PSU cable behind the motherboard tray, so you have to route it in front so you can see. But the good thing is, because if you do it properly, I think you can hide it. I mean, you don't really see it, especially if you're using a air cooler like me. You can hide it underneath the air cooler. Now, other cable management tips that you need to do is routing the CPU 8-pin power supply to the top. Make sure you route it to the top prior to installing the motherboard. Now, other cables that you also need to route prior to installing is the motherboard 24 pin and also the USB type C connector. The thing between these two cables is actually because the cable are very long. You can put it outside, but it will dangle about and the cable will be very exposed. So what you can do is that route it underneath the motherboard and make sure there is enough length for it to go outside back. So basically what I'm telling you, the summary is basically the gist of it is this. The only space that you can really hide cables, for granted that the cable is long enough, is behind the motherboard, and you need to do this prior to installing the motherboard, of course. So which is a bit unfortunate. I prefer if the back panel can be removed. It would make cable management so much easier. Now this ID cooling fan is great because it's cheap, slim, and for me it looks quite nice. However, one fatal flaw, if you're using as exhaust like this, there's no problem. But if you're using as an intake, the issue is that the fan blade will rub against the case and causing a metal grinding noise. Now the solution for this problem is actually very easy. You just need to get one of these rubber grommet at the hardware store. Usually you can find it in the plumbing section, and use it as a spacer between the fan and the case. Now before we go into the thermals, you need to know the specs of the PC. As you can see, the parts I'm using are not really power intensive. So if you're using hotter components, the result might differ somewhat. Now for the stress test, what I did was I actually used CPU-Z and Unigine Valley to stress both the CPU and the GPU at the same time. So basically during this stress test, both the GPU and CPU is running at 100% utilization. Now this is the CPU after running for around 1 hour for stress test. You can definitely feel the hot air from the top. As you can see, the stopwatch has been running for almost 1 hour, 58 minutes. Here you can see the CPU benchmark utility. As you can see, the CPU temperature is very good. The average temperature is around 58. Keep in mind this CPU is also had the power limit, long duration power limit unlocked. So it's actually running full tilt 4.2 GHz all core all the time, which is the unlock of the power limit was done in the BIOS. So as you can see, if anyone is worried that using a smaller case will cause higher temperature, I think that is not really true in all cases. As long as you have a good cooler and good airflow, it should be fine. Now the GPU temperature, as you can see, is also decent. It's actually averaging around 75 degrees Celsius. Although the fan speed is a bit loud, it's running at around I think 80% fan speed. So the speed is around 2500 RPM. So it's not, if you're looking for silence, you might need to get another graphic card. But as far as temperature, it's definitely no issue. Even using a smaller case, you know, using normal fans, it's not like I'm using Noctuas or any expensive fans. The performance is still decent. So the myth of having a smaller case, higher temperature, is not always true. Now, thank you for watching my video. Now, as a conclusion, I would give the case a 7 out of 10. While the case is sturdy and lightweight, however, I don't feel the fit and finish of the case is as good as even mainstream cases like the NR200 or the TechWare Fusion. You can think of the quality of the cases is on par with something like a Zhezhou series of cases. I also personally don't really like the acrylic side panel. I feel like tempered glass would have been such a more better option, because I think that's the reason why the industry as a whole has moved on from acrylic, because you know it's quite fragile, scratches easily, and I think it's an inferior component as compared to a tempered glass. But I do feel that the case is unique in the sense that it is a small form factor case, a sub 15 litre case, but it is able to fit an M80X motherboard and an ATX power supply. It has very good parts compatibility, which is always nice when someone is looking for a bit more versatility in terms of what they can put in the small form factor case. Also, as soon as previously, the ventilation of the case is very good, which leads to very good thermals and performance for the components inside the case. And you guys, like always, if you like my video, do consider to like and subscribe the channel. Do consider to support me by helping and doing those two things. Otherwise, if you guys have any questions, leave it in the comment section down below. Otherwise, see you guys next time. Ciao!